Happy 2021. It's been a doozy so far, but we didn't expect it to immediately improve. So it's all good. We'll start with any members of the public. Any members of the public present?
Do you have an open link? Is this still a waiting room type thing?
The waiting room is suggested by the city attorney, but prior
I would challenge that one.
Well, you can take that up with the city attorney.
I'll take it up with the state attorney if I have to. The open meeting, if you're going to have public comments, you have to have an open link. You have the ability under security to close it, and you can dismiss any participant you want. If somebody comes in uninvited, you can easily take them out under security. So, and quite frankly, you don't even need a separate link to have a secured meeting. You can have a closed meeting with that security link. You shouldn't be using that waiting room at all. If somebody has a problem with their internet, they can't get back in because nobody's looking at the waiting room, and so you're not let in again.
Well, it seems to me that we should be consistent with what the city does, since the city is doing open meetings. Jocelyn, it sounds like
I would refer you to the open meetings law.
Ralph, this is Ralph.
Around open meetings in Zoom.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Robert.
I was just going to say I've been on both Middleton and Madison meetings, and the reason a lot of people recommend some type of control is there have been places I've heard about them. Luckily, I've not seen it where somebody joins a meeting, takes over, and starts throwing up pornographic images, for instance. You can
easily dismiss that person,
and they can immediately get back in. And they can immediately get back in if you don't have some method. I'm not saying I'm a Zoom expert, so maybe you have ways around this to guarantee this, but if you don't have something where you have to actively let them in, somebody can be kicked out and they can immediately bring themselves right back into a meeting. So if
you're denying access to members of the board, even
not if you
one meeting,
not if you're paying attention, not if you're paying attention with a if you're having somebody kind of keep an eye, and I have it right up right now. I will admit that the list that I have has to be scrolled up and down, and maybe I can extend my list higher. Yeah, I guess that right now. But so let's not get into the details.
Can I go back to the question I was asking before I was interrupted, which is, what does the city do with the meetings that are held by, say, the city council? Is there a waiting room for those meetings?
Yes.
Okay.
For the common council, yes. I'm not sure that every committee meeting is set up that way.
Well, Ralph, the objection is duly noted. I think the appropriate next step is to reach out.
If you're not allowing the public in, you might as well just take it off your agenda.
Ralph?
Yes, I'm here.
As I said, well, you keep interrupting me, so I can't complete my thought. And my thought is that we will reach out to the city attorney and we will get a written statement from the city about the appropriate procedure we should follow. And if you want to challenge that, you can. Otherwise, I'd like to keep moving with the meeting. I will note, for the record, as far as I know, anytime I've been on the library board, I recall one time that a member of the public came to either an in-person or Zoom meeting. So I think, the idea that we're keeping out the masses that are interested in the library board business doesn't make much sense. But in any event, I'm comfortable proceeding with the advice of the city attorney. And as I said, we will make sure that that is formalized. Let's move on to the approval of the minutes from the December 8th meeting. Did everybody have a chance to review those?
Yes.
Yes.
All right, motion to approve?
So moved.
Their second?
Second.
Any discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, thank you as always, Robert. Let's move on to the financial review.
I'm just pulling up our documents real quick.
Awesome.
We'll start off with, sorry, hold on here. The 212 fund statement. So this is the report that I'm able to run from our financial system. As trustees who've been around for a while have watched Rebecca and I work to the best of our ability with sorry, I'm not able to open this properly. With the city financial software that we have to work with, which is very limited and cumbersome. So this is the report that I am able to run each month. Now, this will never balance with, and this was sent in your email too, this will never balance with the vendor report because of the way that the timing of the bills happens. So I run this on Friday, and it's really not updated until a week or so after the bills are approved by council. So I also am not able to export this into an easily manipulated format. So the balance sheets that I'm attempting to create are very cumbersome and very time consuming. And I'm finding that at this point right now, with everything that we have going on operationally, it is redundant and not a good use of my time. I want to know if this is sufficient for what you are looking at, not including any gifts and donations. The gifts and donations is something that we're continuing to work on with Mary Beth as treasurer, and we can get that into a little bit easier format. We're starting this from scratch. So this report is easy for me to run. It might not always balance with our vendor report, but you can see here's our total budget operating wise, and this is where we're spent out. So this gives you all of that information along with the accounts that match up with the vendor report. So Art, I know that you've had a lot of questions about this. Is this, what do you think about this?
So this is fine. The thing about the balance sheet that was helpful for me, which could be separate from this. The thing that I wanted to see was the funds that don't have to be in the balance, they don't have to be in this sheet, but can be just a separate thing that says we have this much in the Madison Community Foundation under this fund, and so much in this fund, and so much in this fund, which doesn't have to be part of this. This can be a separate thing, and then have a separate piece of paper or sheet or report that just has the fund balances each month. And it doesn't have to be that they, whatever is going on, but just so that we know what those fund balances are and what's going on with them.
Sure.
That would be fine for me. So that
Okay.
would that make it less cumbersome for you?
Yes, and I think that's the direction that we're moving in. And that has to do, so this is just taxpayer dollars. These are public funds in the fund 212. So when we say 212, that refers to operating.
Right.
So this is where the money from Middleton taxpayers that transfer in from the general fund, the allocation from the Dane County, and then the funds from the cross county, that's where this total library operations,
Right.
that's all this money. So anything outside of this is all gifts and donations, and that's what we're working on with Mary Beth. And we can absolutely continue to work towards that. Let me share with you then. So just before we move on to gifts and donations, then this is the snapshot of right now where we're at as of last Friday before bills were paid with the 212 fund. So as you can see, we're overspent in a few areas, such as permanent part-time staff. I had a question about this retirement overage. That's something, you know, all the staffing accounts and the benefits stuff, we don't really have control over. Those are all determined. I mean, the board does, but truly those budgets are set by Bill Burns in the finance office. So really what we're looking at in terms of expenditures for what we have control over is the 210 office supplies and everything underneath that. So I'm not sure what this overage for retirement is, because that should have been budgeted and calculated at the beginning of the year, and we haven't had any retirements for several years. So I have a question about that for Bill. Otherwise, you can see here, we've got a few things that are still encumbered within the operating budget, especially in the 230 account books, along with things like utilities and a few other things that don't get paid out until the following month. But this has been another unusual year with the operating budget, and I'm expecting a fund balance, meaning that we have unspent funds from 2020 around $50,000 to $75,000. That is my best projection based on some of these overages. We finalized the operating budget right about what is it, Rebecca, like mid-February-ish or so, when the finance department goes through their audit.
Yeah, it's about when we're done.
Yep. And then at that point, we'll know exactly what we're looking at for fund balance from 2020. And then we'll be able to share that with the board. And then you guys will determine where and what to do with those funds. So we're coming under budget, even after we reconcile some of these overages. And most of these accounts have not changed significantly for 2021. Any questions on the 212 fund before we move on to gifts?
Just a question. So you're anticipating that from the 300,000 unused revenue, it'll come down to 50,000. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm estimating about 50 to 75,000 in fund balance.
And then the board has discretion as to how to utilize those funds?
Yep, that's right, Art. So unlike other city committees, where the fund balance then gets pulled back out of those departments and rolled into the general fund, any fund balance that is coming from the library's accounts remains under the authority of the library board.
Okay, then let me follow up with that, because I'm trying to get used to this being a public entity as opposed to a private entity. So we get a check from the county for roughly $900,000, and then the city allocates a budgeted amount, but they don't actually write a check and put it into a bank account. They just keep that. So that $50,000 unspent, is that the money that we got in the check from the county, or is that the city money, or is it proportional?
It's proportional.
Okay.
They do not differentiate between the different revenue streams. It's just one lump fund balance.
So if we don't spend, if we say, well, we have nothing to spend, then the proportion that comes from the county, does that go back to the county in the form of a check, or does it go to the city?
Nope, that stays with the library's account fund balance.
For the following year? It just carried over?
It doesn't carry over. It is held in a separate account. So historically, I have a list of all of the years worth of fund balance. So from 2013 to 2016, just as an example, there was about $45,000 worth of total fund balance between those 3 years. And then the library board at that time chose to contract with the firm Dimension 4 to do the feasibility study and spend that fund balance. So it's held in a separate account, and that's also where our contingency funds are held. The contingency fund account, I do not have direct access to. We have to work with the finance committee to do that. Last February, because we had had an unusual budget year with staffing turnover and a series of promotions, we ended with a fund balance of over $100,000. So the library board chose at that point to put $100,000 in contingency, and then the remaining funds were put towards next chapter. So there's a variety of ways that we can work with that fund balance, and it's very liquid.
Okay, and I'll ask the question again but I think I understand. Because it's public money, one of the options would, well, I think I asked you before, putting it into the endowment fund, but from what I understood, you had said that that's not an option. Is that correct?
I think legally it could be. And when I asked Bill Burns, he kind of gave me, yeah, kind of an answer. What I think we would need to be really careful of is mingling public funds with gifts and donations, and essentially not using our full budget to the best of its ability and using it like basically a savings account. If we're consistently under normal circumstances and normal years not meeting our budget, and we're continuing to have large fund balances, then we need to look at how we're using and spending our budget. We are always receiving, with the Common Council approval, a minimum allocation. So this is where it starts to get really complicated, and without going into too much detail, every year the Common Council votes to remain tax exempt for the library. And in doing so, they're voting to pay a minimum allocation based on the Dane County formulas in order to receive that county money. So if they say we'll pay $1.3 million out of public Middleton taxpayer funds and remain tax exempt, then we can receive that 900 and some thousand from the county.
Right.
And so all of that money at the end of the year turns into fund balance altogether and is under the library board's authority and discretion. So we don't want to be not spending that money. We want to have a plan for it, either through the use of a contingency fund or special projects.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Any other comments or questions? All right. Thank you, Jocelyn. Any other financial report?
A few quick, just wanted to show you, this is the statement that we just received from the South Central Library System Foundation. So this is a separate foundation account that is held through the South Central Library System. And you can see just kind of a snapshot here of the year 2020. So we started off in January with $12,000. In February of last year, we received that very generous planned gift. And then in December, we transferred that $35,643 to the Madison Community Foundation for next chapter. So we ended the year with the South Central Library System Foundation balance of $33,23. This is the high yield interest account. This is probably one of the most fluid and aggressive accounts that we have, and a really good demonstration of how the library board can use gifts and donations and make money off of money. Any questions on that before we go to the vendor report?
Is the South Central budget funded from the participating libraries? How are they funded?
The South Central Library Foundation is made up of South Central Library System participating libraries. The Middleton Library Board voted to participate in this, I believe it was 2017 or 18. It's basically a high yield interest savings account. There's a minimum allocation every year and a few other details that we could go into at another time, or I can email you.
Okay, that'd be appreciated. Thank you.
The endowments, where we receive the distribution every year, in December received 3 donations. So this was in memory of a former patron, Flora Burby. And here we can see that we had $600 to the endowment, not large print, regular endowment, which will help with that annual allocation on the disbursement. So we have the choice, the library board can vote to receive those funds every year, which right now is about $10,000, or waive the disbursement and just have the endowment continue to grow. And then lastly, we have our vendor report. And this is really where we see the most financial action, and by law are required to report. Sorry here. Thank you for waiting. So you can see, for example, here's that 230 account, books, and then here's all of the itemized transactions underneath that account. Rebecca does an amazing job of handling all of the vendor reports and paying the bills. Rebecca, is there anything that you'd like to point out specifically this month?
Sure. If you scroll down to periodicals, you'll see that large payment to EBSCO, and that's for our paper magazines. And so that's pretty much the entirety of our budget in that area. There's a few more bills that will come in, one newspaper or magazine subscription here or there, but by and large, that $16,000 is what we pay per year for our magazine subscriptions. So that's a big one. Couple other 2021 subscriptions coming in. We're kind of that time of the year where some things we're paying for and coding back to 2020, other things we're looking ahead as their annual subscriptions for 2021. And so just being really mindful of putting things in the right year. I think you can keep scrolling, Jocelyn, unless anyone had any questions about what we've looked at so far.
Art, right down here under special library accounts, this is what we're going to be working on to format a little bit differently. So it includes everything. We previously had several random accounts in the 204. So this is not 212 like the operating. This is 204 where the revenue is put, including the public funds. And then there was a variety of small random gift accounts Because we don't receive interest on any of these gift accounts, and because it shows up along with public dollars, it's really in the library board's best interest to be holding these separately and reporting them alongside the public funds, but not necessarily being held at the city where we don't have the capability of that interest, for example. So just a real quick rundown. We have, here's that endowment contribution. Here's where we had the large print disbursement, for example. And then we have another kind of random account. This is a great example, actually, Katie's Kids. This is a memorial that I know Rob and Cindy will remember for a patron. And we didn't necessarily have a place to put this back in 2014 or 15 or whenever it was received before I started. So it got placed and deposited with the city. Every year, the family continues to make contributions to this fund, but we're not making any interest off of it. And the way that the reports run, it's not showing a running balance. It's just showing an annual deposit total. So this isn't really a true accurate representation of what's in Katie's Kids funds. It's just what was received in the month of December. So we're not really seeing the full picture here. So this is where it can get confusing. Oops, sorry. So that's a good example of where we can pull out those gifts and donations, create a little bit different reporting structure, and really have a better picture of what's really going on with those gifts and donations. We also have reimbursements that happen. So this is, these are all patron names that they paid for an item and then they found it and they wanted a reimbursement.
Going back to the Katie's Kids Fund, how is that money used, Jocelyn?
Sure. So this, great question, Rose. Thank you. These funds are used, there's about a balance, if I can recall, and Rebecca, maybe you remember, about $25,000. And they contribute approximately $5,000, about $5,000 a year. This 1,200 was extra. These funds are primarily used right now for outreach and the purchase of library card holders for our third graders. So because of this memorial fund, we've been able to bring almost every single third grade class in the Middleton Cross Plains Area School District in Middleton to the library, pay for that transportation, that busing, and then offer them a little something special extra with their library card. This has been a really long-standing and great program. Obviously, we weren't able to do that this year, but it's also a really good example of why we do not want to be accepting designated gifts, because then we don't necessarily have the flexibility to use the money to the best of the library's ability or meet the needs. And we don't have, I mean, until just recently with the revision of the gift policy, we didn't have a way to handle the relationship building around a gift that had a designation. So, and again, another great example of why we need something like the South Central Library System Foundation account, or an improved relationship with the Friends, or strong policy indicating that, you know, designated, you know, there's challenges with designated gifts.
Thanks. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Any other questions on the vendor report?
All right, can we get a motion to approve the vendor report?
I so move.
Or a second?
Second.
Second.
Any further discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you, Rebecca and Jocelyn. Old business, update on reopening.
Sure. Right now, we're continuing to look at late March, early April, as long as case numbers go down. There's a variety of different metrics that different libraries are using. So at this point in time, not all Dane County libraries are using the same metrics to evaluate reopening, and we'll start to see different levels of service happening across the county. So for example, Madison has a different set of metrics than Wanakee, and Wanakee is opening this week for browsing. I'm still feeling like early April is a realistic time frame in terms of preparation of operations. All community health metrics aside, we're doing a lot right now internally with staff training based on our new org structure with the promotion of the library assistants. We also have a variety of FMLA happening right now. February is always a short month. And then we have spring break happening at the end of March. So that's the time frame that we're looking at right now. Nothing has necessarily changed. We're continuing to do curbside and offer all of the same services and stay healthy. We have had one employee who had COVID, tested positive, and was quarantined at home. Thankfully, the timing on when that testing happened did not impact library exposure at all.
Good. All right, any questions about that?
So when you say opening, whatever the time frame is that a graduated kind of thing? So can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. We're still looking at a phased reopening schedule. So the first phase 1 would be limited number of people in the building for first floor browsing access only. That would also include computer access. The computers would need to be managed with a schedule, a registration schedule. We'll probably have to have somebody at the front door counting people in and out. And we'll also have all of the furniture removed, minus a couple places for senior citizens or those with accessibility needs to sit. So we're really encouraging a quick visit to the library. Holds pickup will be available, and we'll probably offer some sort of curbside service. So for example, we might and this is something that I'll work with management team on, a recommendation to you is, we're not able to do curbside service and be open at the same time. So we would, maybe do curbside pickup on Monday, Wednesday, Friday afternoons, and then Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday mornings or something, we would be open for in-person. This is where we would need community input, and we would like to do a survey to kind of help us determine what the majority of our user patron base would prefer. But we also don't want to do that survey until we get a little bit closer, because things change so fast, and we don't want to give the impression that we're opening sooner than we might actually be able to. So we'll have lots and lots of displays, and with our new service model focused with more on customer service delivery, we're really anxious to be able to reopen the doors and get people in the building.
Great. Thank you. I can't wait to be there.
Yeah.
All right. So the next item, I'd asked Jocelyn to put some library report retreat reflections. I thought, our retreat wasn't that long ago, but it already seems like a really long time. I don't know how time passes during this pandemic. And, I thought made a lot of really great progress on talking about goals and things we want to accomplish and how we want to try to serve better our community. And so I wanted to open things up to talk about that part of our discussion, the community partnerships, the community outreach, how we can reach more people. In conjunction with that, the other thing I'd like to talk about is actually a question that Ralph raised with me a few days ago about community communications, about getting information out to the public about our new offerings. Hoopla, for example, is really great, and I think people are excited about it. What more could we be doing either through the media, through our own channels, in other ways as ambassadors of the library, which we all are, to be communicating about how to use these new resources and where they can be accessed. So that was my thought about that. Okay, we have a media list. Look at that. So do you want to start with that second question? And Ralph, I don't know if you wanted to add anything in terms of your thoughts or ideas about that.
I think you said it very well. We'd hope that we could use some of even the free accesses for the Middleton Tribune, as well as the Mr. Zen's publication. But I think you would have public service capability on any of the media stations. That's an exciting field. And you have data bases that many people aren't aware of. And just taking at least one a week and explaining it, getting people excited. People that may not look at the website to search it or explore it. This way they might be enticed to go there and participate in the library activities.
Right. I agree entirely. I actually had a wonderful experience earlier this week when I discovered that I could get to newspapers.com through the library. I didn't know that, and I'm president of the library board, and spent a lovely hour when I should have otherwise been working, finding old newspapers, reports of my grandfather, who was a preacher in Arkansas in the 1930s and 40s, and finding newspaper clippings about him. But I digress. In any event, I think those kinds of stories.
Courtney, if you want to share that with us for social media, I would love to.
I'd be happy to send you that stuff. It's fascinating, and I shared it with my 80-year-old uncle who anyway. We had a lovely afternoon communicating about it. But those kinds of, I think, we've talked a little about Hoopla. I think we've gone on some of the social media about that, but the people who access the social media are probably a little more sophisticated. How can we get that information out to people who might not follow us on social media?
Just a quick
Jocelyn.
comment. We do regularly send events to several newspapers, including the Middleton Times-Tribune. I've written articles for them in the past. I know that there's, before I came to Middleton, there was a standing column for a while. They don't always publish everything that we send them. And sometimes the timing with the print can be challenging. This is, I think, where, there's so much information at the library that utilizing your networks as trustees and advocates is really powerful. If there's ever a time where you would like to write an article for the newspaper, that's something that we would definitely be open to and encourage. It is always an option. Right now, because we are running really lean due to the pandemic, and most of our users are online at this point, we've been focusing the majority of our efforts on organizing our social media postings and have a pretty extensive calendar to do so. We also do not have a dedicated staff person that can really truly focus on communications. So we're taking a team committee approach and have representation from every department in the library. And Rebecca really helps with this team quite a bit. So at this point, I'd say we're kind of doing the minimum, but we're also trying to do the minimum really, really well and really organized without the dedicated personnel.
I would also say too that communications has really changed in the pandemic, right? So we're really only able to advertise and communicate to people through certain channels now. There is no in-library browsing, there's no in-library promotion. And so we've had to really shift gears with what we're doing right now, and hopefully that won't last forever. But I think we're feeling that too, that, you know, any additional ways that we can reach people right now would be very helpful. So bring on the ideas.
I thought of
Well, there's
another
a big
idea
difference between mass media and person to person, as you suggested. And the publications of the newspapers, as well as the broadcast stations, will get to a lot more people than the trustees talking to some neighbors or friends.
Well, one of the things that I thought of, though, that we could do is use the next door media. A lot of people look at that, and I don't use it very much, but I certainly probably should do it more. And that would be a way we could let people know what's going on at the library.
Well, the same article written for next door could very easily be put into the paper as well as released.
Mhm.
It takes the concentration of telling people what's there. And very often the vendors will help you with this. I'm sure that whatever database you have, they have their own promotions that they could actually develop your release for you. So it wouldn't take a lot of staff time except for putting the link together or recopying. But probably should be initiated through the library as opposed to individuals.
Rebecca, I like your cat. Any other, you know, other thoughts about that thing? You know, any volunteers to write? I mean, I will tell you that, you know, I'm in a couple of other nonprofit booster type organizations. I bug Michelle Phillips over at the Middleton Times Tribune all the time. She gets tired of me. But, you know, I think the idea of, you know, a library board member, if you've really got the interest to try to assist with this process, to, you know, put something together, a perspective from a board member, I think might be a really great way for people to become more aware in the community, not only of what the library does, but what the library board does. I don't know that everybody knows that we have a library board, and that there are a group of 9 people that you could approach with your suggestions or thoughts about the library. And so maybe that's an angle that we could take as well.
Mhm.
That's an excellent suggestion. However, I would say that very often you're going to have different library boards consisting of different members, so there's not that continuity. Something from the library to establish as a pattern would probably be better for the community in the long run. Plus, they're the staff that are carrying out the functions. They're the ones that are carrying out the responsibilities. I don't think you should push it onto the board members to do that.
This is Robert, just as a counterpoint to that, the one thing that I see, and I see it in City Hall, I see it at my company, you know, if you have a dedicated person to do something like press releases, that is awesome. But when you don't, you know, the team paid to do a job takes away their time from doing their job to do all these other things. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're seeing if people on the board can volunteer. We're kind of the flexible staff that can kind of help out where it's needed and pivot, you know, differently. Whereas, you know, to say to somebody like Jocelyn, hey, Jocelyn, would you write something like this up? She can either take time away from other things she needs to do to run the library, or she can put in extra time, you know, of her own personal time to do something, which isn't fair for her as paid staff. So I think there's a room for both, honestly, is what it comes down to.
Well, I understand your whole point. It's certainly a good one. However, communications is important. And with a library offering, I think informing the community of what there is critical. And it should be an assigned task, duty, and responsibility of some individual on an ongoing basis in a position within the library. Doesn't necessarily have to be Jocelyn to doing everything.
Sure, and you're right. I'd love to have a press press person for the city of Middleton too, like the school district has or had Perry Hibner. It just sometimes it's hard to find somebody to take on that role.
Well, other thoughts about community engagement, I mean, beyond the idea of media reports, how, we talked, I think, about things like the possibility of finding a secondary location where we could welcome people, being able to continue the work that Amy already does, reaching out to members of the community. Other thoughts or ideas about that we would want to try to raise and look at over the course of the coming year?
I have reached out to Chief Harris of the fire district in regards to their station on the corner of Q and Century. I have not heard back yet, but Mike Davis did tell me that the city contributed 65% of the funds for that building, but it is owned and managed by the district. So I'm not sure what the likelihood of a partnership in that physical space would be. But I've reached out to Aaron anyway, so we'll see what he says. One thing that the board right before me looked at extensively, and Robin, Cindy might be able to speak to this a little bit more, was a branch. And when we look at if you want to look at those, the report from that, it's all on the library board's webpage on our site under the feasibility building needs study. It's over on the right if you scroll down. It's a big document and it does outline quite a bit about a branch. A full service secondary location would probably be going a little too far at this point in terms of long-term planning. Before we did that, there would be a variety of steps that we would want to take, including working with the county, working with other area municipalities. For example, if we did do something out towards Highway Q, then I would definitely want to make sure that we're working with the Wanakee Library Director and the Wanakee Library Board. Similarly, in the other southwest direction towards on the outskirts of Madison and towards Mount Horeb or Verona. We could also explore options, and this was on the budget several years ago, of a bookmobile service. So supplanting a bookmobile site and to explore or build interest in a public library. There's lots of demographics and GIS surveys that we can look at. Anytime that we look at a full service location, we're automatically doubling potential personnel costs. Things like delivery, utilities, staffing, any kind of long-term lease agreements or land acquisitions. Those are all quite costly and would most likely not be able to happen without a referendum. We could do like a express type library or something with limited services. So that's probably where I would start exploration if we wanted to go in that direction. At this point in time, I have no idea what's happening with the community campus plan. Nor do I don't think that the council does either at this point. Unless Robert, you have some exciting other information. I think as of right now, it's kind of dead in the water. So I think it behooves the library board to look at longer term secondary location options, but I would do that in small ways rather than looking at a land acquisition in a brand new building and full service.
Yeah, and at least, my takeaway and my thoughts from the retreat were not full service. It was the trying to reach folks, but not, but also more than a bookmobile. I think that we are at a point now where library services go so far beyond books, and that really a need for folks to have computer access, to have a place to study and meet and work. And that's what was so intriguing about the building on Century, is that you could set up a very small space there that wouldn't be so much at all about books. But anxious to hear what others have to say. Also, just wondering, as a general matter, if we have folks on the board that have a particular interest in both of these topics of community engagement, not only with outreach and information, but the idea of kind of exploring what else could we do with outreach. Maybe we do need kind of a subcommittee of some kind that would look at this issue more carefully and come back to the board with some recommendations.
Yeah, Courtney, this is Chris. I was just thinking the same thing because in my prior life working on a foundation board, we had like a communications committee. I know we're not quite talking about that, but I mean, I think I'd like the idea of like a subcommittee kind of going on, digging deeper into some of these things.
Right. I mean, I think community engagement is a great term that would cover both communications and then the idea of separating folks out, because I think these are really fascinating topics, but I don't want to take up all the board meeting time with them. Are there folks who want to raise their hand or give ideas about whether they would be interested in serving on such a group?
I'd be interested in being on such a group.
Yeah, same here. You can put my name on too.
Sure.
I would too.
Art?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I would suggest, just to get started, looking at the space needs study right over here on the library board website. There's a specific section on a branch, and this also really gives a great detailed outline on the need for additional space.
Great. All right, well, thanks. Let's continue to have these discussions and continue to have this as an agenda item, but why don't we move on for now to get to our committee updates. I don't think we have any personnel committee updates, do we, Jocelyn?
Nope.
Okay, building?
Not necessarily. We we have some things that we're working on with that final phase of next chapter. And that includes the biggest priority right now is really signage. This is permanent signage throughout the entire building that includes directional wayfinding, collection, and naming rights. So that's kind of the next thing with anything building related that we're focused on. I'll also point out that we just were upgraded with an air filtration system. I don't know if you're familiar with needlepoint bipolar ionization. This is a fairly new technology that libraries are working with. Because it's new tech, the results are somewhat skeptical of how effective it is in regards to killing the virus, specifically COVID-19. But we have been upgraded in our facility. We have 2 HVAC systems in the library in 2 separate locations in the lower level, and both of those have received this upgrade. That was about $5,000, and that came through with city funding. All city buildings that were able to receive this needlepoint bipolar ionization upgrade system, or some sort of UV option. UV wasn't an option for us because we have HVAC, and the way that it works with HVAC, we had to go with the needlepoint. So that's kind of cool and worth noting.
That is cool.
Yeah.
All right.
I have a question or a comment. When we were talking about the signage, we were talking about maybe having some people from the community get involved in the signage too. And I realize that that's not possible right now with COVID, but is there a possibility of waiting on the signage a little so that maybe some people of other ethnic minorities might get involved in some of the signage?
Sure. Multi-language is something that we're definitely interested in expanding more of, especially collections. The collection signage, we've asked the vendor that we're working with to keep that flexible. Collections move a lot and they shift, and we want to be able to control those ourselves. Things like the naming rights, like the in-space name recognition, like the word restroom, vertical down the side of a wall, those will predominantly be in English. The two naming rights word murals was what we were really wanting to reflect the diversity of languages spoken in Middleton. And those are something that we would definitely want to engage more with the community. We did reach out to the language specialist at the school district, and she gave us the top 15 languages spoken by families in Middleton, which was really fascinating. A couple of languages that I was not familiar with that I learned something about. If we did that, I think we would definitely want to engage more. But this is primarily permanent directional signage and the naming rights. Other things that we really want to focus on multi-language are service related. So this would be like a welcome to the library brochure, available in Spanish or Russian. And have those visible and available, so we don't have an invisible barrier happening where we have these resources available in Spanish, but you have to ask for them or you don't see them right away. So it's not actually really a service. So that's where we would probably put the majority of our translation efforts.
Any other questions about that? All right, let's move on to development.
All right. Let me get our next chapter spreadsheet up. We have some very exciting movement happening. It feels a bit anticlimactic because we're still working with the deposits of a recent donation, but with a recent donation of $7,500, we are now complete with our next chapter fundraising goal ending at over $200,000. So I believe the final balance prior to being invoiced for any fees is $200,992. So we're waiting to finalize that so we can celebrate in a really big way, and we're hoping to do that hopefully by the end of the week. Because we pulled and really cleaned up that 204 revenue fund, it was pretty complicated to do so. And I'm still working with Bill Burns on a couple of these source funds. So the things that you see in red are things that we're still finalizing. We are started off with an internal balance by scraping all those funds of $300,000. Here's where all of the money for next chapter was spent. This is every transaction. We are overspent right now with city funds of $65,233. We transferred $35,643 from the South Central Foundation to the Madison Community Foundation. We also transferred the disbursement from the endowments to the next chapter fund. So right now, MCF is holding a balance of $193,402. We just received that donation of $7,500, so that puts us over our $200,000 goal. And then here's where our final phase estimates are kind of shaking out right now. I'm still working on some quotes, but these are some best guesstimates based on either previous quotes or other libraries that have recently purchased furniture or equipment.
Jocelyn,
Yep.
You've done a magnificent job of the entire Next Chapter project, particularly fundraising. Fundraising is a real challenge, and you have raised a lot of money and made it happen through a lot of your efforts, staff, lots going on. Super job.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I think
Yes.
that
This is
this
great
has
news.
been a really good kind of first run at really getting all of these background structures and systems in place, so that if we ever did want to go for a branch library or a referendum with a fundraising campaign in a much bigger way, we've built a lot of these systems, a lot of it thanks to Rebecca's hard work, in the background, so that we're ready to really hit the ground running and we don't have to create these things from scratch all over again.
We'll
It
look
also
forward
was
to it.
Yeah, it also was a really great way to sort of test the waters. We were able to do $200,000 with over 450 individual donors. The Friends came in with the 30,000 for the community room naming rights. We had that wonderful bequest of 25,000. We had the 10,000 from the endowment disbursement, the recent gift of 7,500. So those were kind of our big top gifts. I did not receive any grants. So that's an area where we have a lot of potential that's completely untapped. With time, constraints, and also then the timing with COVID, I was really ready to gear up to write a lot of grants in March, and then COVID happened. So this is doing this without any grants. So I think that people in Middleton and the users of the library truly support their library. A lot of these donations were between $50 and $1,000. So that's a lot of individual user support.
Was that $7,500 one from a private individual?
Yes.
Boy, that's very nice.
Yes.
That's great. Fantastic. All right. Well, thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you, everybody, for making this possible. That's really exciting news. All right. Let's go on to liaison updates. Robert, do you have a city council update?
Yes. Trying to think if there's anything particularly library related. To get back to an earlier point, I wouldn't say the campus idea is dead in the water, but it's certainly on life support right now. I mean, we are just, I guess one thing I'll say, this is maybe a little bit more for the community rather than for the library, but we are doing a lot right now to try to help the downtown area especially, and make sure businesses don't go out of business in the next few months to a year, because there's a real risk that there's problems going on there that, and if once we lose businesses, it's, like 10 times harder to try to get somebody to fill that spot. So we're trying to do that kind of stuff for the community right now. And that's been kind of our major focus. So things like the community campus are way back burner. Can't think of anything right off the top of my head that's strongly library related. So I think that's my report.
Great. Any questions for Robert? All right, Chris, the Friends.
Yeah, I just got a report from Karen this afternoon, and then Jocelyn and I were at their meeting last week, I believe. So the update I got is, given the current pandemic situation, their donations from corporate letter and renewal from members has been good. They did vote to approve funding for 2021 with the contingency that when the library reopens and is offering more services, they'd welcome additional requests for funding as needed. They're working on plans for Friends to reopen the bookshop and resume volunteering by looking at new policies and procedures that may need to be in place to make it a smooth transition. They also recognize it's a good time to review and renew policy and procedures and implement updates in such areas as volunteering procedures, payment procedures, moving to a more cashless system in bookshop, and book donation processing to reduce recycling and improve use of books donated. That's really, because obviously not a lot's happening. I also mentioned too, Courtney and I did reach out to Karen, who runs the Friends, and we're kind of starting conversations now that we've got the time before the library reopens just to kind of see, and this came out of our retreat. If some of you remember, we talked about how can the Friends and the library board work better together. So we're kind of starting those talks, and Courtney and I are hoping to meet with Karen and kind of start that process. So we'll kind of keep you posted, because I sent the email today to kind of start the conversation, but it is happening. So hopefully more on that front soon. And that's all I got. So.
Great. Thank you. Mary Beth is not here unless she snuck in when I wasn't looking. You know, I mean, the schools, I think we've got elementary kids going back in a few weeks, right? Parents of elementary students, which I'm not. We're looking at March for high school. So, you know, we will see what happens next with the district. The community, and we put next to that the Middleton Equity Team. You know, there had been interest in the Middleton Equity Team process, and we talked about it some at the retreat. And one of the things I wanted to do is get not only an update about what's happened with that, but also to see what the board might be able to do, folks who are particularly interested in terms of representing the library on that group.
I think I sent a message to Jocelyn saying that I'd be very willing to participate in that group and represent the board if everybody is agreeable
Yeah.
to that.
I think that would be wonderful, Rose. I forwarded an email from Mike Davis that included the meeting information along with the minutes and sort of a status of the community group right now. The focus is heavily on the mayoral's appointment process and creating a safer and welcoming environment that encourages engagement and participation, and especially encourages diversity. So that's something that the city staff have been working on, including myself. The first step of that is to offer an informational meeting to gauge interest and also to serve as a tool of recruitment. Right now, there isn't necessarily an overview or, hey, you want to participate in civic engagement with your city. Here's what that might look like. It's really up to individuals to take the initiative to find it on the city website, to print off the PDF application, to turn it in. And so we're looking at the mechanics of how that might operate a little bit better. And then we're also putting a lot of pressure on the mayor to create a process and procedure that's transparent and communicated. This is one of the powers that the mayor has is city committee and board appointments. And we as city staff are not able to support that process if we don't know what's going on. So it sounds like from Mike that the mayor's been receptive to that first step of the informational meeting. And then the city clerk's office is working on what an online form might look like for submission.
Great.
I mean, that certainly
That's
is
great news.
consistent
Yeah.
with, you know, that again, the discussion we had at our retreat, looking at diversity within our board as much as we're interested in diversity amongst our staff and our patrons. So that's great news. So
And
when's
that's
the
been
next
ongoing
meeting?
for a long time. So good for you for working on that.
That's great. So can we get Rose plugged in then to the equity team meetings, and Rose, we'll put
Right.
you on the spot in our future agendas to report on what's been going on.
Okay, sounds good. I will do.
All right, thank you.
Courtney?
Yeah, go ahead.
One of the ideas that came out at the retreat was organizing a task force to advise on diversity issues. That would be advising the board, and that idea came up because we realized that right now there's no openings for adding anybody else to the board, and may not be for a year or two. And rather than waiting for an opening to occur, we could form a task force and have people added to that, and then they would advise us as a board on diversity issues. Is there any way to make that happen, or what's the way to
Sure,
proceed?
right, because I think, as I recall the discussion, the first question you'd raised, which was a good one, was could we simply expand the size of the board? And we can't do that because the
Right.
board is limited to 9 individuals by statute. But the idea of a committee that would of the board, which would include board members, but can also include community members, I think is a fantastic idea. And if we've got the energy and interest of folks to set that up, I would really love to get that going. We've already got our communications group. If we've got another group that's ready and willing to move forward on some of those diversity issues, I would love to see that, because it's not just, it's the board, but it's also the related aspects of the staff and our patrons. It would bring in issues like what we were just talking about with signage. It would bring in other issues potentially with respect to collections and how we meet and reach different populations. So if you're volunteering, I think that would be, I think setting up a group like that would be really terrific.
I guess I'm volunteering.
Very good.
I guess I'll talk with Jocelyn about how to proceed then.
Right. Are there others who are particularly interested in this issue? I know, Rose, you've already volunteered for our communications, but it's not too late to switch, or if anyone else wants to be involved in equity issues, that would be really great.
I'm wondering if the communications and the task force on equity could be almost one. I mean, couldn't it almost be the same kind of thing, or am I?
Well, I think that's maybe biting off a little bit more, a little bit too much. I think that there are ways in which there's a little bit of overlap, but what we're looking at on communications is really how to get the word out to everyone.
That's true.
Diversity and equity is really, I think, more specialized than that.
That's true.
Well, let's give it some thought, and we can maybe talk about it a little bit more next month, or Art, you and Jocelyn can come up with a plan. That would be great.
Okay, thanks.
All right, director's update.
Sure. In line with the topic of EDI, we right now have several things going on internally. So part of the Ripple project, which is a Dane County initiative that we've talked about and has been included in the strategic roadmap report in previous months. We have a 3-person equity team that's based of myself, Liz Zimdar is the head of adult services, and Jen Sen, who is a part-time library assistant. Right now, our focus is heavily on staff support and staff training. I think things like an ad hoc committee is a great idea. What I would caution and be very conscientious about moving forward is creating situations where we are putting the work on other people rather than ourselves internally. So by that, I mean, we as a library staff and board have the internal work to do towards racial literacy and anti-racism, not necessarily asking other people, especially not persons of color, to tell us what to do. It's our responsibility to do that work ourselves, and it needs to start as individuals and grow towards an organization, an organizational approach. So that's really what the Ripple project is focused on right now. We're doing that with our 3-person team of staff at the library in Middleton. And then we have regional teams throughout the county that are just in the process of forming right now. Part of the training that is happening, and I'm waiting on some answers back, is if trustees are able to join these. Our training starting with the history of racism and implicit individual bias, and then moving all the way towards white supremacy and things like trauma-informed interviewing for better hiring practices, with Cream City Conservation based out of Milwaukee. So there's 12 hours of training that are broken down into 6 to 8 sessions happening in the month of February. And so I'm inquiring as to whether or not that is going to be able to be opened to trustees or other city staff. These were going to be done in person, and now we're doing them on Zoom. So I hope that the accessibility is broadened because of that capability. We're also, the three of us right now are registered for a 2-month training through Justified Anger. This is through the organization that's local, including Nehemiah. And this is specifically looking at the history of racism in the United States. And it meets weekly. So this is a pretty big commitment. Part of this that we're looking at is that this is not necessarily something that we're going to be able to tackle or really support in just a year. We're looking at how can we create change within systems and structures that can stand the test of time, and that we can move forward progressively and build on changes and actions, not just at the library, but also at the city level. So long term, we would like to offer more book discussions to the public. We also realize through the White Fragility book discussions that small sessions, and small, I mean like 6 to 8 people, is really ideal for book discussions around topics like racial equity and diversity and racial literacy. With a high demand and only being really able to do a good job with a small number of people, this puts a lot of pressure on staff, and we need to be able to expand our facilitation efforts to include more people. In order to do that, we want to be able to train and support those efforts. So again, we're looking at where do we start with ourselves as individuals, and how can we then expand on that as an organization. We also want to be very deliberate and mindful about the programming that we offer to the public. In talking with a potential facilitator through the YWCA for later this summer, they use the analogy of inch deep, mile wide versus mile wide, inch deep. It's better if we go slow and go deep and deliberate rather than just scratch the surface, especially as we're looking at a predominantly Caucasian patron base and program attendance. We want to have people leave programs thinking, wow, we have a lot of work to do, rather than, wow, that was great. I've done my work. I know what's going on. I feel really confident. This is deep systemic issues, and we're actually causing more harm if we're not taking it very deliberately, mindfully, and seriously. So that's the approach that we're taking towards internally supporting staff, and then externally offering programs to the public. Sorry, what was that, Rose?
I just said it sounds great.
Yeah, it's big and it's heavy, it's emotional, it's laborious, it's important and necessary, and it's also very challenging when we've completely overhauled all of our internal processes and procedures and operations to also take on. So we we're really looking at community partnerships as we move forward and supporting other city departments. This is not just the responsibility of the library, it's all of our responsibilities. And so we're taking it very seriously. In other exciting news, we have some of our statistics coming in from 2020. And I've included a few here just to give a little snapshot. White fragility was one of the most checked out physical items of 2020, and that is most likely a direct relation to some of those book discussions that we offered. Our 2020 totals are pretty dismal compared to past years. But considering that we were closed for over 2 months and are now still closed to the public with the facility and just operating curbside, these are pretty phenomenal statistics. 191 days we offered curbside service in 2020 for a total of 1,137 hours with over 33,500 appointments. I have not had a chance to talk with other library directors to see what their 2020 curbside stats are looking like, but based on the efficiencies that we've been able to create with the support of Patrick through our online scheduling system, I guarantee you that they're not looking like what our stats are looking like right now. This is pretty phenomenal and a direct result of all of the hard work that staff put into brainstorming how do we completely redo things. So this is exciting.
Jocelyn, I think I've told you that I know about a handful of people that switched to Middleton during the pandemic because of the online scheduling, because it's so much easier to come to Middleton. So that's great.
Yeah. And I'm really proud of us for continuing to move forward. We've, when we started curbside and any service that we've begun during the pandemic, we didn't want to offer it and then stop or move backwards. We wanted to continue to scale up. So we've really taken an entrepreneur's mindset with operations, and I think it really shows through the success of patron satisfaction and continued increase of use. And then really December was really focused internally. We have a lot going on with staff, and my primary focus right now is supporting staff through all of our training efforts and completely overhauling and creating from scratch something as basic as and complex as a new emergency procedures manual. And training staff on what to do, when the plumbing, overfloods in the men's restroom. So all of those types of operational things, we're considering these back to basics. And I've found that this has really been very grounding for staff and has really provided us a better foundation for moving forward, not only together as a staff, but also as we look to hire new people in the future. So not necessarily big and flashy public things happening, but a lot of behind the scenes work.
Terrific. Any questions, comments by anyone? All right. Well, thank you very much, Jocelyn. Does that get us to new business?
Sure does.
Do we have any new business?
I do not.
Okay. Anyone else have any new business? All right. Well, absent that, I'm sorry.
Include the communications as part of new business. I would like to move that the library enact some kind of public communication effort with mass media.
All right, there's a motion. Anyone want to second that motion?
Second it for purposes of discussion.
Sure. All right, discussion.
So what I'm guessing, what exactly is the action of the motion?
That there would be information released to the public through the mass media about what activities or what offerings the library would have. This could be a short article once a week to local print media, if not to the mass media, the electronic media. It shouldn't be that time consuming, but it would be an effort to allow the public to know what's going on. We speak of diversity. Well, many of the people in different ethnic groups aren't aware of what is available. And this would be a way for them to become interested and perhaps participate to a greater extent. So I think it would achieve many of your goals in addition to increasing the participation of the community with the library. It just makes you just a greater, more valuable resource. And it's a resource that the people should be aware that is there. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't really realize how much the library has to offer them.
So I don't want,
Majority.
oh, go ahead.
I'm just saying the majority of the people probably don't.
I'm a little confused because I thought that's what the communications committee was supposed to be doing. And so I'm confused with where this is different.
Well, okay, what is the charge of the communications committee?
So that is an internal staffing team. And I don't want you, Ralph, to think that I don't appreciate the effort to want to get the word out about the library. I do want you to know that before motions are made, asking questions is a more productive way to learn about what is currently happening and what the current efforts are. So that list of media outlets are places that we regularly use, regularly send things. We have staff that represent a variety of different departments. We also have things like a survey that was done last year indicating where are people predominantly getting their information. And it's not happening through the newspaper. So because we do not have a dedicated staff person, and I would argue that it does take a lot of time to communicate with each of these individual outlets, we concentrate our efforts into what we know is working and what people are asking for. So when we're looking at changing up staffing operations, it's more productive to ask questions and learn than to assume that things are not happening or to make motions that are perhaps not founded on what something like the survey might provide for us.
Well, I look to a board as dealing with policy, and staff is dealing with administration. And staff not telling the board what to do or what the policy should be. And I look to a board to have a vision of the community, to have different parts of the community present those policy recommendations. And then the board decides what would be their policy. That's all.
Is this something that could be referred to the communications?
We don't want to be just yes people. We want to look ahead and take initiative where we need to go.
So that's why I feel like asking questions is where you can learn about what's happening. A lot of these things we are doing, and we also don't have control over what gets posted. I have taken time to write things for the newspaper and then they don't publish it. We have so many events in the past that they've told us that they're only able to pick several. So there's a lot of efforts already happening that you might not be aware of, where questions and seeking to learn would be a better, more productive angle.
Well, Courtney, I'm looking to this board to discuss this, and I appreciate your comments, Jocelyn. Does anybody else have any feeling about community information?
This is Robert. I think if we as a board are willing to fund a new position of a communications director type of a person,
Public
I think
information officer, yeah.
that would be one thing. I think that's one thing that I think a lot of what you just said, Ralph, is absolutely correct. We are the policy. We make the policies for the library. With that being said, I don't want to do kind of an unfunded mandate type of a thing where we say, go do this, and then say, okay, well, why did it fail? A year from now, well, it failed because the right resources weren't put in place. I think this is a worthy discussion. I don't know that it's ripe at this minute to actually implement anything, but I think we should continue to have this discussion. And maybe it should be on a dedicated agenda item might be a better way to handle this now, rather than saying it's an action, so to speak. Sorry, a dedicated discussion point for a future meeting for our group.
Right, with the recommendation of the communications committee, which is what I had in mind. I guess the other comment that I would make is, as a board, we are not empowered to micromanage the operations of the library. We are empowered to hire Jocelyn. And that's her job as executive director. And we have the job of reviewing her performance. And if we think that she's not allocating resources correctly, then, then that is part of the review process and whether or not we choose to retain Jocelyn as the executive director. I think communications, gets to a broader question, but, think about taking this out to the extreme. If someone on the board decided that, we're spending too much time shelving and instead should be spending our time cleaning the bathrooms. That's not our role. That's Jocelyn's role, to staff the library appropriately. That being said, I think we certainly can have a communications committee looking at what else we could do. I agree certainly with Robert's suggestion that if we really think this is something the library needs, then we should be funding a part-time person that would be responsible for communications, or a full-time person, although I don't know that that's certainly necessary. Other thoughts about this before we take a vote on the pending motion?
I agree with that as well, what Robert said and what you said. And also, I would rather discuss something before we vote on whether or not to take action doing it. And I think an open meeting requirement would be, if we have an action item, it has to be on the published agenda, doesn't it? So I don't think we can even do this.
That's correct.
So can we refer this to the communications committee for further study before we do anything else, and ask for a report back to the board?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Well, yeah, okay. I certainly brought it up as a new item, and I thought, every committee I've ever been on, you can discuss things under new agendas.
I think you can discuss them, but I don't think you can take action on them when a meeting is an open meeting.
That's my understanding too.
I've never heard of that. No Robert Rules of Order I've ever heard of had anything like that involved.
Well, if we didn't have it specified as an agenda item, then anybody could add anything under new business and it could be taken as action. So any sort of new business is open.
I see what you're saying.
Is open for discussion, but any formal action would need to be listed as an action item on a published agenda. Yep, we can absolutely take this back to the communications team and revisit those survey results, look at how things have changed since the pandemic. We can review the media list. Media outlets change all the time. So do contacts and the effectiveness of those relationships with contacts. So if we took this to the—
I know where you're going, and I know your decision pre-handed, so I'll agree with Robert. This is probably not the right time, and I'll withdraw my motion. Thank
Well,
you.
what I was going to ask before I was interrupted was, what exactly would you like back from the communications committee? Like a report of like current status, or those past survey results, or the volume of information that we're sending out? All of the above?
I withdraw my motion. I have no further questions. Thank you.
Okay. Well, if that's it, I guess we can move to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Hi.
All right, thanks everybody for your time and attention to all this stuff, and I look forward to seeing you in February. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Too.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Have a great week.
Good night.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Bye, Robert. Thanks. You
Bye.
too.
Thanks. Bye.
Mhm.